pick it up today in chapter 3 in the great book of Genesis. In chapter 3, right around verse 13, it reads, "And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done?" Question. And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. And when you take this word beguiled back into the original Hebrew manuscripts, it means wholly seduced. In verse 14, the Lord speaking to the serpent or Satan. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. In verse 15, the Lord, still speaking to the serpent, And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Now, here in verse 15, we don't only see the Lord telling Satan that he will put enmity between Satan's seed and the woman or Eve's seed, but this is also the first prophecy of Jesus Christ, that the serpent will crucify Jesus. In other words, Jesus will bust the serpent's head, and he will bruise Jesus' heels. Continuing on in verse 16, the Lord speaking to the serpent still. Or actually, I'm sorry, the Lord speaking to the woman Eve. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. So this is the Lord speaking to Eve, telling her he will multiply her conception, or in other words, pregnancy. And he goes on, In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. And when you go on, as you could see in chapter 3, Eve had already conceived. When you go on into chapter 4 of the great book of Genesis, it continues on and says, And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel. And when you take this word back into the Hebrew and the appendix, this word again means to continue in labor. So she continued in labor. And also, when you go into verse 3, you will see that Cain and Abel were the exact same age as they gave their offerings to the Lord at the exact same time. Verse 3, and in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the first of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. So here you see them giving their offerings, the two brothers, Abel and Cain, at the very same time. If you go into chapter 5 of this great book of Genesis, this chapter covers the genealogy of Adam. And you will find in chapter 5 that Cain is indeed not in the genealogy of Adam. Also at this time, I would like to go to the great book of John, where you will hear from Jesus' words himself. Right around chapter 8 in the great book of John, right around verse 44, Jesus states, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth." And who was the very first murderer in the Bible back in Genesis? That would be Cain. He rose up against his brother Abel and slew his brother Abel. He continues on, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar, and the father of it. And if you go back to Genesis, the great book of Genesis, right around verse 8 in chapter 4 of the great book of Genesis, you will see here in verse 8, and Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass that when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him.